welcome to those of you joining us now for our live event, our Placed Academy Insights. I'll just give you a few moments to get on the call and join us. Very exciting. This is our finale. It's our final event of what's been a 10-week long program. Each Monday, we've had a panel of professionals from the built environment come on and talk to you about their career journeys, give you some insight into what their job is all about, and offer you some top tips and advice about getting into the industry. And this program has been brought to you by Placed, and we are a social enterprise. We work all across the Northwest, engaging local communities in conversations about their environment, the places they live, the places they work, what they love about those places, how they'd improve them, how they would change them. We also run an education program called Placed Academy, and this is a program for 14 to 18-year-olds that are interested in the built environment and want to learn a few skills required for that industry. It's a free to access program, and we have just published some new information on our website about the next program that's about to happen. So make sure you go and check that out and look at the details on how to apply. Just to let you know, we are recording the event today, and all of our recorded Placed Academy Insights events can be found on our Placed Academy website, so you can catch up on any of the events that you might have missed previously, or rewatch any that you'd love to remind yourself of and write down some tips. And today's event is all about aligning your strengths and values with your job and being your own boss, and what it's like setting up your own business. And we've got a really great panel for you today. We've got Matthew Clubs-Cauldron, architect. We've got Jodie Greenwood, graphic designer, and we've got Ben Prince, architect. We'll be hearing from all three of them as they sort of tell us a little bit about themselves, their background, what they studied, and how they've come to the point where they are now running their own business. Each of them will present for around 10 minutes, and then we will open out to some questions from you guys. If you have a question for any of them, you need to type your question in the Q&A box, which can be found at the bottom of your screen in that panel. So type your question in there. If someone types a question you want to know the answer to as well, then I encourage you to like that question, because that will help us know where we can start, which questions we should start with when we open out. So yes, that's enough from me. So let's begin our insights with Matt, if you're all right to share your screen.
Yeah.
And start us off.
Okay, so can you all see that then? Yeah, so hi, and thanks for Placed for having me here today. And so yeah, the way that we've sort of tried to structure these talks today is just in order of essentially how long we've each been working for ourselves. And as I've only sort of recently started that journey, what I'm going to talk about today is that transition from working for someone else to working for yourself, and the decisions and reasons that led up to that. And I'll also talk a bit about my experience of it so far, and the initial doubts and anxieties that have inevitably come with making that decision. So to give you a bit of background, I'm 29. I've been fully qualified as an architect for just under 2 years, and been officially working for myself for about 6 months now. I'm originally from Sheffield, but I studied at the University of Newcastle for both my part 1 and 2. And I found it a really great city, and the course they're really enjoyable. So after the BA, my year out in practice, and then graduating from the Masters, I went on to work for 4 years in a large commercial practice of about 50 plus staff, who mainly specialised in hotels and student accommodation. And it wasn't necessarily the sort of architecture that I had aspired to at university, but I did develop a massive amount and learn loads when I was working there. And it was also whilst working there that I took the Part 3 course and finally qualified as an architect. So as part of that part 3 submission, you're actually asked to reflect on your career to date, but also where you might see yourself in the future. So I mentioned that that place I was working wasn't ideal, but despite that, I did want to gain more experience as a project architect. So essentially, my sort of 5-year plan was to stay on at this place and build up my knowledge and experience. Um, now, obviously, at the time of writing that, I had no idea that less than a year later, we'd be faced with the COVID pandemic. So when the hospitality industry on which my practice heavily relied sort of closed overnight and nothing new was coming in, I was put on furlough along with almost half of my colleagues. Um, and during that first period of lockdown, I, along with many other people, was lucky enough and actually had the privilege of having time to reflect about what I was doing and whether this was really the right place for me, and also what kind of contribution I wanted to make to the world. Because for the first time in years, I was noticing the changing of the seasons and becoming aware of the huge variety of bird life just outside my window in the railway verge, and growing vegetables and all those kind of like lockdown cliches. But perhaps most dramatically, actually breathing noticeably cleaner air with fewer cars on the road at that time. And at the same time as that, I was reading Feral by George Monbiot about rewilding. And I'd always been very conscious and in touch with nature. And for a while, I had this feeling of solastalgia, which is a word I only recently learned, but it's essentially describes this feeling of existential distress caused by the environmental change and loss that we're seeing. Um, so I really wanted to be part of a change, um, for the better. So when my practice started to look at making redundancies with the tapering off of the furlough scheme, I spoke to my girlfriend, who was very supportive, and I decided to leave that commercial sphere where I felt that those environmental concerns were, barely even an afterthought. Um, so taking the plunge. So I didn't just jump straight into the void, as it were, because during that period of furlough, I'd start to take on some of my own work for various family friends and other contacts that I'd made during my career, doing measured surveys and drawing up designs for house extensions, etc. And there was a lot of interest from people who had, clearly been sat at home over lockdown and noticing all the things that, they needed doing and changing to their houses. And I actually realized that I might be able to match my salary, if not increase it, whilst potentially working less and, maybe with less stress. So I started to think that this would be a viable way to support myself. And working at my previous practice was great at times, but because of the size of it, I never really saw the whole picture and wasn't necessarily party to the decisions and some of the reasons behind why I was doing what I was doing. Um, and a lot of architects tend to hate on the part 3, I think, which I mentioned before, which, if you don't know, is the final qualification and hurdle, if you like, to becoming an architect. But I actually found it really useful and quite empowering in illuminating a lot of the mystery of how the profession works. But also importantly, it prepared me for a lot of the things that now, as I work for myself, I have to think about and worry about. So having a direct interface with clients and how to manage that relationship, and thinking carefully about the advice that you're giving people and your potential liability, and generally acting professionally and responsibly, of course. And I wouldn't actually say that the weight of that responsibility feels any different to when I was working in a large firm. And because now that I'm seeing that whole picture, you could argue that there comes with that a sort of greater feeling of control. So making that change was obviously exciting, but it was also scary at times. And some of that initial interest, that initial burst of interest that helped launch me into working for myself was speculative to some degree. And I quickly realized that, not all of the quotes and fee proposals that you take time putting together will actually lead to anything. So there have been times that, I have been anxious about money, which wasn't something I worried about when I was a salaried employee. But then you also start to think about these so-called life goals. So, owning a car and getting a mortgage, which at the moment might be inaccessible to me. But then going back to George Monbiot, who sort of seems to be my hero at the minute, I was reading his career advice, which actually made me feel a lot better. And I think would be really helpful for anyone wanting to pursue their own path and ideals. He talks about the myth of job security, which I think this pandemic has actually highlighted really well, because it turns out my job wasn't particularly secure anyway. And he paraphrases Benjamin Franklin saying that whenever you are faced with a choice between liberty and security, choose liberty, otherwise you'll end up with neither. So he acknowledges that in pursuing your own ideals, you may have to be prepared to, live on less at first and maybe postpone some of those milestones, but at least you're traveling in the direction that you want to go. So another thing to think about when starting out on my own was the potential isolation that can come with that. Because one of the big things that I had come to realize over my architectural education and my working life is that personally, I have sometimes been quite reluctant to engage with others and can have a tendency to be quite introverted and retreat into my comfort zone, if you like. But I know that it's the times when I've opened myself up to new experiences and engagement with others when I've actually thrived the most. So I have worried that I could be cutting myself off from my peers and the rest of the profession and the opportunities that that brings. So that's why it's been really important to actively maintain engagement, even when we're doubly isolated due to the pandemic. So keeping up with my friends and contacts within the profession, my university, maintaining membership of the RIBA, which requires a certain level of ongoing professional development, and reaching out to organisations that I admire, like Placed, and taking part in events like this. But also knowing that life is flexible, and if the right job in a practice were to come along, that I could take it, but hopefully this time with a greater personal agency. So just to finish, I'll show you some of the work that I've been doing since starting out on my own. At the moment, it's largely small scale residential projects. So there's a cottage extension in the Dartmoor National Park, where we're looking at converting the oil fueled heating system to air source heat pump, along with solar generated electricity, and potentially using hemp based concrete as part of the construction. I'm also doing some freelance work for a practice here in Liverpool, which is good because it keeps me speaking to other architects. And I'm also developing a theoretical proposal based on the concept of political rewilding. And at the same time, educating myself about what I can do as an architect to contribute more positively to the world, with hopefully plans to enrol on courses at the Centre for Alternative Technology down in Wales once things open up again. So aiming for that ideal sort of balance of theory and practice, but also continued education. That's me, and thank you.
Thank you so much, Matt. What a fantastic presentation to start our discussion off. Like your current work looks really varied and really exciting and interesting, and it's great that you can now sort of decide what your work is entailing because you have ownership over your own work now. Also really useful for you to outline the differences between working for quite a large organization, a large company, and then moving to how your responsibilities have now shifted when it's just you, starting out on your own. And these are some of the things that you young people listening to this might want to have a think about. When you think about your job in the future, do you imagine working for a really huge company, or do you think you would prefer a smaller team? How important is it for you to have kind of a bit more ownership and kind of make those decisions around what work you take on and how much that work aligns with your values? Matt mentioned there about sustainability and the environment being really important to him, and that sort of becoming even more apparent during lockdown time. So yes, it's definitely given us some things to think about. Thank you so much. We are going to pass on to Jodie now. Please put any questions that you have for Matt or Jodie or Ben in our Q&A box. No question's a silly question, just put one in there. So Jodie, when you're ready, can you share your screen? Now, Jodie is a bit of a step away from the built environment as a graphic designer, but she's got some really interesting insight to give on running her own business. So we thought she'd be great for our panel.
Am I on mute? Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay. So my name is Jodie, and I can't get this to go into full screen. There we go. So my name's Jodie. I am the founder and director of a company based in Liverpool called Wedge Collective. We're a digital creative agency, which means we specialise in design and marketing, and we also do some business training as well. So we kind of are expanding at the minute into being what you could loosely, I guess, refer to as like a one-stop shop for new businesses or small existing businesses, or people looking to take that step into being freelance or taking the leap into entrepreneurship. We kind of can talk to them about their business idea, maybe provide them with some training, with a logo and a brand and a website and some marketing to kind of get their client base underway. So I myself trained as a graphic designer and illustrator at university and at college. And I've got a few examples of my work here to show you while I'm talking. So our clients are pretty varied, which I think you can see through these. They're quite varied. There's not a load of examples, but I'll flick through them as I talk. My business at the moment has been active for about 3 years, I think. Maybe, yeah, about 3 years. But I've been working freelance maybe for about 7 years, like more seriously, but I was always working freelance through college and university for like to get some industry experience and also obviously to get a little bit of money to see me through university. I think what I thought would be most useful to share with you guys today was my route into kind of owning a business and where I'm at currently. It wasn't like the most straightforward path. So hopefully sharing my experience will help a few of you guys. So I've got a slide here. So the route to where I am now, as I said, it was a bit meandering, if you could use that word. So at school, I was quite academic. I wasn't the best behaved, but I was quite academic. So I used to mess about a bit, but still do well, like one of those really annoying kids at school. I was quite academic, and I was the first person from my family to like get any qualifications at all from school. So I personally at that age felt a little bit of pressure to kind of, one, do really well, and two, follow what would be seen as quite an academic career path, and I kind of felt pressure to do what the other people in my family had wanted to do but didn't have the opportunity to because of their own like exam results or situation, etc. So I'd done really well at school, and then I went to sixth form and I chose subjects like humanities. So I'd done like history and geography, and I'd done these things because I didn't know whether I wanted to study law or architecture. I think I was leaning more towards architecture because I wanted to do something creative, but at my school there wasn't much emphasis on creative subjects, so I didn't get the opportunity to take like art at GCSE. I'd done graphic design as like my DT option. I don't think it's called DT anymore, which just makes me look really old, but whatever that is called now, that was what I chose. And that was kind of the only creative thing that I had, as well as like drawing and stuff in my spare time, which I really enjoyed. So at the end of sixth form came the decision of, do I follow this academic route that was kind of, I think, what people were expecting of me, or do I go into something creative? And at the time, I'd done 4 A-levels, but I'd done the 4 for the 2 years. Like I didn't drop one after the first year. I think I initially chose art and design at college thinking I'll drop that in the second year because like that would be what people wanted me to do, but I kept them all, so I kind of had the option at the end of college and just felt very overwhelmed by, should I do what I really want to do, or should I do what kind of people are expecting me to do and to make other people happy, basically. And I ended up going for architecture, and I got 5 unconditional offers, which was obviously amazing. And I think I was like the only person to not be excited about the news. And then I realized I didn't want to do it. I got like my starter pack, and I was like packing to leave to go and live in Sheffield to do architecture. And I basically had a little cry to my mum and said I didn't want to go. I had some time and I changed my subject to law and then done the same thing. And I just was like, I don't know what I really want to do, so I don't think I should go. So I didn't end up going to uni at that time. And then I'd like missed the academic year. So I just thought, I'm going to have to do something. So I got a job to kind of support myself until I could figure out what it was that I wanted to do. I got a job in HMRC, which is like the tax office, which I still know nothing about now that I do pay tax. But at that time, I definitely didn't have a clue what I was doing. But people from my family work there, so they were able to like help me get an interview, basically. The job that I got was like, I think it was like 4 p.m. till 11 p.m. It was like odd working hours. So I got this job and I was quite excited at the time just to have something going on. When I got there, I realized that I was the only person under 18. So when it got to like 9 p.m, like an officer used to walk into the office and walk me out because I wasn't allowed to be in the building after 9 because I was too young. And it was just very embarrassing and I really didn't enjoy it. And I kind of spent the year there until I could figure out what I wanted to do. But I definitely knew it was not working in an office, doing something that wasn't creative. I just didn't feel happy doing what I was doing. So while I was there, I saved up because I then was above the age of going to community college. I had to pay for my course, and I'd done an art foundation, which I really, really loved. And while I was there, I started to like connect with other people in the industry. I got an internship and I was doing everything I could to get as much real life, real industry experience in design. I started doing some freelance on the side and kind of promoting that on social media because it was free at the time and I was on social media anyway, so I might as well have posted the work that I was doing. And from that, I was able to build up a client base before going on to uni. So while I was at uni, I studied graphics and illustration, and then I later on specialized in graphic design. But you kind of get to play around with the two before your final year when you decide like what your main project is going to be about. While I was at uni, I worked doing like an internship alongside, and I also done some freelance. And then one summer went to London because I got a job offer for someone that I'd done freelance for, and worked there for a few months. So by the time I'd finished uni, I had quite an extensive portfolio, and some people just had the work that we'd done at university. And I think that really played in my favour because I was then able to approach people before I had my degree and say, I've got a degree on its way, but I've also got this portfolio ready to show you now. So by the time university finished, I already had a full-time job as an in-house designer for, I'm not going to name them, for like a catering company. So they bought catering products and I basically was doing their design and marketing, which I did for about a year, and it was quite an exciting year, and I was able to travel to different countries and attend like design like conferences and trade shows and all of these kinds of things. And then the reality of like working in an office again, although I was doing something creative kind of hit me after a few months, and I realized it might not have entirely been the job that I was doing. It was kind of the structure of the 9 to 5 was just not working for me. And I think doing like a repetitive thing the same every day just doesn't make me happy after a certain amount of time. And I kind of like tried to force myself into enjoying that for a while. And then I realized that some people just don't fit into that, and that's okay. And I spent a lot of time researching it, just like Matt was saying he did, and different theories around this. And I went on YouTube and looked at people who had set up their own companies and gone freelance. So while I was at that job, I started getting in contact again with people that I'd done freelance for previously, and built up some work until I was able to build that work up enough to leave that job behind. I got a part-time job with the same person that I'd done my internship with, and was able to support myself doing that work for a few days a week while building up my own personal client base. So I was doing that part-time stuff, and then I was working really late nights trying to figure out what I wanted to be, because I was freelance. And obviously, as Matt mentioned, like you get lots of anxiety and kind of worry about, I'm freelance, but it doesn't seem that stable. And that's when I realized I needed to strive towards being a company, so it can be a little bit more stable, I hope. But obviously at this moment in time, like nothing's that stable. But that was my aim, and now I'm here. So I was kind of freelance for a couple of years, just solely freelance, like just completely relying on myself to get work every month. And then I established Wedge Collective because I was commissioned by a college, and I had to be an organisation rather than just myself going into the college, I guess, for like safeguarding and checks and all of these kind of things. So I formed Wedge Collective on a train journey back from visiting my in-laws in London. Made my logo in like 2 minutes and just like came up with a name and just kind of formed it that way and sent off my pitch, and I've just stuck with Wedge Collective ever since. And we've now got like a small core team. We work with freelancers, and at the moment we're kind of expanding to make our core team a little bit bigger, which is probably the biggest challenge that I've faced yet of working on my own, trying to establish what kinds of people I need to be involved in the business, and then finding those people, which is a little bit challenging. But yeah, if that's a helpful story. I've also put together some top tips. I don't know if these are useful, but hopefully they will be. So as I was saying, I was lucky enough to get an internship when I was at university, and I was able to make connections through that and do some freelance work off the back of meeting those people. So my main tip, I guess, is to start making connections like as soon as you can, even if you're like still at school or you're still studying or you're doing your A-levels, even if you don't know what you eventually want to do. I think attending like stuff like this and speaking to the other people that are taking part is just a really beneficial thing to do. I done a course very similar to this when I was like 16 and 17, I think, doing my A-levels, and those people that I met on that course I now share work with, which is really useful. So always stay in contact with people. Practice what you love doing and find industry experience in it. So I obviously realized after some time that graphic design was what I loved, and I practice it a lot in my spare time, as well as doing like my education. I set myself personal projects to kind of make sure that I was gaining all of the skills that I possibly could, and I went out and got as much work experience, like paid or not, and internships as I could. I posted it on social media and was able to expand my network and also my commissions via that. And obviously the main thing is to follow the path and do what you really want to do, which sounds very like much of a grand statement. But what I'm trying to say is, if I'd have gone and studied architecture, I know that I wouldn't have been the best architect in the world because it wasn't entirely what I wanted to do. So I wouldn't have dedicated myself as much to it. Whereas doing what I do now, I know that I'm like trying my very best and I'm like excelling at it because it's what I truly want to do. And I don't think I would have got to the point of owning my own business at the age that I am now if I'd have gone and done one of those other courses that was kind of expected of me, if that makes sense. I hope that was helpful to someone.
Yeah, thank you. Wow, Jodie, what a journey. So interesting to hear your ups and downs and where you are now. I mean, what an experience, and kind of really having the courage to listen to your inner gut that was saying, no, this isn't the right path that I'm going on. I need to make a change. It takes a lot of confidence in your inner belief and trusting that gut instinct. to make that change. And yeah, okay, so Ben, we'll pass to you now before I can see there are some questions coming in, but yeah, I encourage you to type your question, and we'll just pass to Ben now as our final panelist before we do our question.
Okay, can you see that?
Yes.
Okay, I won't risk going full screen because it wasn't working any. Right, okay. Thanks, Matt and Jodie. That was great. I think my name's Ben, by the way. I'm also an architect. I'm a bit further on. I've been working for myself for about 10 years now, but I think a lot of the stuff that Matt and Jodie said is very rings true with me as well. So I think some of the things that I've been through similar experiences, but I'm not going to talk too much about the earlier stage. I'll kind of briefly kind of tell you how I got to where I am. Talk more about what I've learned over the last kind of 10 years or so of working for myself, which has on the whole been pretty good. But let me start with this timeline. So I started when I left school a long time ago. So the first 2/3, I suppose, of this chart is kind of what Matt was talking about when he was saying about his part 1 and part 2 and getting his professional qualification. So I'm not going to talk too much about that. You can ask some questions if you want to. But by 2006, I fully qualified as an architect, and I was working for a medium-sized practice in Liverpool. I was working on some quite reasonably interesting jobs, but I think I'd kind of reached a ceiling at that practice. Couldn't really see myself going any higher than that, and although it's quite comfortable, and like Matt was saying, there's a reasonable amount of job security. It wasn't fully satisfying my architectural kind of need, I suppose. So, but I think I quite liked the security, and it took a bit of a shunt to get me out the door and start working for myself. So whereas with Matt, it was the pandemic, with me, it was the credit crunch, the last recession in 2008, 2009. And so in 2009, I was made redundant. I think a lot of architects at the time were. The construction industry was decimated, really. It was a pretty grim time, and it kind of forced me into a decision, I suppose. So I'd always thought that at some point I'd work for myself, but I hadn't really put any further thought into it than that. But this kind of made me put the effort in. So I did look at kind of going back to work in practice, and there was a couple of job offers. But I thought, well, why not? Now's the opportunity. I may as well give it a try. If I can start up in a recession, then that should hold me in good stead. So yeah, there's those kind of anxiousness of not having any income, and where do you get the work from? But I gave it a go, and I didn't have any work when I started. I hadn't built up a portfolio like Jodie. I didn't have a kind of bit of work to go to. I just kind of thought, I'm going to set up on my own. Now, I suppose one of the good things about the architecture business, and I suppose graphic design as well, is that actually you can start up relatively easily and relatively cheaply. You don't need much stuff. You kind of need a computer and a room. You don't have to have an office or anything like that. So you can keep your overheads down, but you've got to bring the work in. So my first job came through being in the right place at the right time, really. It was a colleague of my partner, and they were having a baby, and they wanted to do some work to the house and expand it. It was just a tiny little extension up in Preston, but it gave me the experience to take that I'd gained working in practice, to take a project from start to finish, and obviously generate some income, and then you can start to kind of build from there. So it got my foot in the door and got me started. But at the same time, a bit like both Matt and Jodie were saying, I didn't know anything about running a business. I think because the practice I worked for was perhaps slightly, I don't know Matt's practice, but it was perhaps slightly smaller. I've had a little bit more insight into how they ran things. But that first couple of years, when I kind of had bits of work, but not a huge amount of work, I had plenty of time to kind of talk to people, read about things, go to conferences, and learn about how to actually run a business. So I've learned to become a better architect, I think, in the last 10 years as well. But that was the easy bit, doing the architecture. It was how do you run a business is the tricky thing. So the first thing, I mean, one of the big lessons is really to talk to experts and talk to people and friends and people you know who've been through that process, and listen to their advice. Some of it you'll use, some of it you won't. But if someone's already been through that journey, then they'll have something to offer and to give you. Again, there's a few examples of books I read there. The Guerrilla Tactics, which is an RIBA thing. If you're interested in it, if any of you out there are interested in architecture, very good small practice conference. There was also at the time a business kind of training course that Liverpool Chamber of Commerce put on for free for new startups. So I went on that. And again, picking up on what Jodie said about kind of building connections and building a network and making relationships with people, I think that is the #1 lesson really from the last 10 years. And I was talking to my partner about giving this talk, and she said that the best thing she's learned is that the sandwiches are really important. And what she meant was, when you go to a conference or you go to a talk or something like this, it's not just the information that you're getting when you have the look at the slides, but talk to people and get to know people and build that network and build those relationships, because you never know when they're going to be useful, or they might have a job for you. So in the early years, sounds easier, but I did, again, similar to Matt, lots of small domestic extensions, private residential work, and the top, well, all of these jobs came from referrals from people I know or friends of friends or whatever. But the top job, for example, there came from the business kind of network business course I'd gone on from Liverpool Chamber of Commerce. The guy who ran that knew someone who wanted some work. He knew I was an architect, so they put me in touch. And since then, I've worked with that guy again. But it was just an example of how you never know how these kind of relationships are going to come back and help when you're running a business. So, like I say, go to events like this, but talk to people and get to know people and get to know people who share your values as well. Because that's what this, I suppose that's what the theme of this talk is about. And I think that I'll talk a bit about it later, but in terms of shared values, I think it's really important to work with people, not just in terms of employing people, but in how you, in terms of clients, people who share your values. Because if you don't kind of have a shared vision or a kind of shared philosophy about how you're going to work and how you want to produce architecture or whatever business it is you're in, then it's not going to be an enjoyable process, whatever that project is. And especially with architecture, quite often that process is quite long. So you want to be able to get on with people. And again, this kind of ties in with that in terms of expanding your network. So during the first few years of where I was working, I started to get more work, but I also started to do other things. So I think, again, talking about lessons to learn is being your own boss is really good. It can be scary, but it also allows you to be flexible and do other things. So at the top is obviously Placed, which is the organisation that are organising this. And again, that working with Placed only came about from doing a workshop with the RIBA, where I met Joe, who runs Placed, and that became a network relationship or whatever that's kind of lasted and gone on, and I still work with them. Likewise, I do a bit of teaching at Liverpool University, and I did do some teaching at UCLan in Preston, and those both came. One was an ex-tutor who got in touch to ask if I wanted to do any work, and the other one was an online event that I got involved with, and that, for one reason or another, I won't go into detail, led to a kind of tutoring job, part-time tutoring job there. So, and I was able to fit that in around my practice work. So what that did certainly in the first few years of running the business was give me a bit of regular income, which was a little bit of a safety net, but it also gave me flexibility and additional contacts and got me out of the house. I think Matt was talking about kind of isolation of working for yourself, and obviously we're all working at home at the moment. One of the big things that I found when I was kind of forced to work at home because it kept my overheads low was it did separate me from the industry and from what was going on. So it was good to kind of get involved with these other things and kind of make sure you you can keep some human contact, I suppose. I just put this slide in. I think the main crux of what I'm talking about is maintaining relationships, and that's really 90% of my work, I think, comes from either a client base that I've built up, and I've now managed to get some repeat clients, which is really good. So at the start, it was very much one job. That was the end of it. Then you go and find another client. But now I've got some repeat work. That also then leads on to other work. So you get referrals from existing clients. But another thing that I like to do when I have the time, and I would encourage this as well, because it's kind of research as well as something that lets you flex your, I suppose, creative muscles a bit more, and that's architectural competitions. And I'm slightly conflicted. I don't rely on them for work, and I would never kind of recommend that. But I think they're really good if you pick the right ones, in terms of, even if you don't win the work from them, is expanding your kind of knowledge and research in certain things. So all of these particular projects were kind of based around climate change and sustainability and circular economies and new materials. So it was, although we didn't win any of those, the research and the value and the building of the portfolio is still really useful. So I think running a business isn't all about kind of earning the fees and getting the money in and doing the job and moving on to the next one. I think you've got to give yourself a bit of time and space to do those other things, which will allow you to move on to bigger and better projects. And I'll just kind of finish with a slide, which is some of the work that's ongoing at the moment. And this again comes back to working with the right people, I suppose, and shared philosophies and shared values. So for one reason or another, I've ended up working on quite a few historic buildings. That's kind of not necessarily by design. I didn't set out to do that. But in terms of the type of project that all of these are, they're all slightly different. So there's a house at the bottom left, which is, again, look, all of these projects kind of revolve around sustainable kind of techniques and philosophies. But we've got housing there, we've got a kind of dance centre, we've got a community centre, there's a cycle hub. So there's a range of types of project, but what kind of ties them all together is that the clients all share a similar philosophy, and I think if you don't have that, then you're never going to get a good project out of it. So it doesn't really matter to a degree what the type of project is. Some people kind of say, I only want to work in hotels, or I only want to design skyscrapers, or I only want to design houses, or whatever. I think for me that isn't an issue. What I really want to do is work with people who share my ideas about kind of sustainable design and reusing existing buildings, and how you can introduce new technologies into that. And if you do that, then you're going to get a better project out of it, and you're going to have a better relationship with that client. So you can't really have a good project if you haven't got a good relationship with your client and you haven't got a good client. So I think that's probably all I've got to say, really. Make those connections. And sorry, India. I
was just going to say thank you so much, Ben. I think what's really really standing out to me in what you've presented there is the importance of kind of connections, relationships with others in the industry, making sure you're maintaining those. You never know what that might lead to in terms of future opportunities, as well as really sticking true to your ethos, your values, what's really important to you, and making sure that's aligning with the clients that you choose to work with and the projects that you choose to take on, as being something that's really important for you in kind of running your business. Have I missed anything?
Yeah, that sounds perfect.
Great, thank you so much. So much insight from all three of you at different stages along this journey of running your own business. So I can see there are a few questions. The reason we wanted to kind of bring this sort of session to you is just to open up your minds to different ways of working. It might be that the 9-to-5 office massive company isn't that suitable for you, and actually what's really important is the ethos behind the work that you're actually doing, or having a bit more control over that. So it's just to try and give you some inspiration that there are different ways of working as options for you in the future. It might not be something that you begin with, or it could be like Jodie, kind of, she got onto her running her own thing quite early on. So I'm just going to open to some questions that have come through. Matt, I can see you've answered one that Archie put in that was quite specific to hemp-based concrete. So if anyone wanted to see the answer to Archie's question, sorry Matt, were you going to say?
No, sorry, yeah, just yeah, I have answered that, yeah.
So check out the answer for that to that question, Archie's question, if you want, in the answered column. We've got one here. So we've actually got one for Jodie here about how did you have the courage to tell your parents that you didn't want to continue at uni for architecture and law? Do you have any regrets? That's kind of 2 in 1 there, but yeah.
I don't actually remember I don't remember the moment of saying that I don't want to go, but I know that I had got myself really stressed out about it at the time. And I assume I must have I think I got quite upset, and I told my mum, and she obviously could see that I was obsessed about it and was like, nobody's going to force you to do anything, as you would expect. And then I remember going into college, I imagine a couple of days later, and telling my tutors and stuff, and they kind of give me like I'm not angry, I'm a bit disappointed speech. And then I was like obviously very upset about the whole thing again. I remember that happening. But the only thing that I would say is, if you at any point feel like, oh, I'm doing something that I don't want to do at anything in life, would be to talk to someone about it. So if you're doing like even your GCSE course, if you think that you've maybe chosen the wrong thing, speak to like a parent about it, or speak to someone at school who can help you, or college or wherever you are, who can help you with that. Because I feel like if I'd have spoken about how I was feeling a bit earlier on, I probably could have got some guidance from someone at college about what I could do next and what my other options were. But I just felt very kind of stuck in that path of, you go to sixth form and then you go to university, and I didn't look for help for any other route. I just felt like that was the only route. But there's things like this, and there's things that you can speak to like advisors and stuff, and they can help you. So I would say, if you feel like that at any point, kind of don't try and push it away, but draw attention to it and try and figure out how you might solve that. I don't regret not going into doing uni or law, and I don't regret kind of the path that I did take to get to where I am.
Sorry.
Yeah, I don't regret the path that I did take, because obviously I was able to experience different things. So I knew that I'm now definitely doing what I want to do. I probably regret not saying it early on.
Thank you, Jodie. Yeah, so any kind of little doubt, make sure you sort of act on it in a way and speak to someone for some support. And that's great that you have no regrets. So my cat's obviously wanting to come in for the finale of our final program. Can I just want to ask one question before we ask the other question that's come through about the best part about having your own business, which would be great to hear from all 3 of you. But would someone be able to explain what freelance is to Matt? Would you be able to explain what freelance work means?
Sure, yeah. So I suppose it's you're kind of employed in a way on a sort of flexible basis, but without the rights and I guess some of the securities that come with having a contract with you know, a firm. So yeah, so with my old place, I was on a permanent contract, and I got, you know, so much money per month, and, you know, had certain rights, etc. So yeah, it's a bit more of a casual arrangement, I suppose.
Yeah. Oh, have we lost him, or have I just lost him?
We've lost him, I think.
Oh no. Okay, well, you managed to answer some of that question for us. But yeah, freelance work is slightly different to having a kind of permanent contract, and there's positives and negatives to that, in the sense of perhaps it's less secure income, but then you maybe have more flexibility around what work you choose to take on at what time. Matt, have we got you back? We'll hopefully get him back. I'm going to move to our other question that came through, which is, what's the best part about having your own business? Ben, could you start us with that?
Yeah, what's the best part? I suppose the best part is kind of having, especially for architects, is having control. I think a lot of architects are control freaks, but I think with that control comes a lot of freedom to kind of do what you want to do. So like you say, you don't have to work 9 to 5, you don't have to get up at 7 in the morning to commute to an office. Obviously you've still got to do the job, but it allows you to do those additional things. So for me, the working with Placed and doing the teaching, that kind of thing, I would never really have been, I probably could have done it if I was working 9 to 5 for practice, but not to the same level of input and to the same kind of level of commitment. And I think it just, it allows you potentially to have a much better work-life balance and be in control of all of that, I think. So that is, I think that's the best thing for me.
Thank you. Jodie, what is the best thing for you
I think
having your own business?
I think for me, it's probably when I mentioned about even when I got like an in-house design job, but I was doing it every day. I obviously was just working for the person I was in, the company I was employed by. So I was doing like the same sort of designs day in, day out. So I think the thing that I like most about working for myself is like the variation of projects that we get to work on as an organization, but the same at being freelance. And I think now that I'm a little bit further down the line, I think at first you can say yeah to every project that comes up, as I'm sure that other people here have. But now that it's been like a few years, I feel like I'm able to kind of pick what projects would be most suitable to us and what kind of aligns with us the most. And I think that's the most fulfilling thing for me, is to be able to like connect with people and work with people who have similar values or interests and are trying to do the same kind of thing that we're trying to do.
Thank you so much. Yeah, so kind of pick and choose variety and connect with people that are on the same have the same ethos as you. Great, thank you. Matt, we're just on this final question, which is what's the best part about having your own business? So you're quite new into this, but and thank you for sharing some of the anxieties you've had on that in that process, but what would you say is the best part now?
Well, I think I just came back in time to just catch some of Ben's answer to that, and he also mentioned it during his presentation. Yes, I think it's the flexibility that it gives you to, well, just do other things, apart from just working for 8 hours a day, which is a lot. But because we all have different and varied interests, and like lots of different hobbies and other things that that take up our time, and we're not sort of, one thing doesn't have to consume our lives, I think. So I would say the flexibility, just having time for other things.
Definitely, thank you. Yeah, so the flexibility and being able to have a bit more control over that work-life balance and making sure you've got a variety of things going on in your life and it's not just work. Okay, thank you so much to our panelists for sharing your insight with us today at this live event. Thank you to those that have attended to listen and that have come to our programme throughout over the 10 weeks. I hope you found it really helpful and interesting and insightful. We've really loved running it. So big thank you to our panelists, and that brings us to the end of our event today, and also the end of our Placed Academy Insights programme. So thank you very much, everyone. Take care.
Thank you.